The Springlock Suits are probably some of the most iconic inventions of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. And look, I've told you all time and time again, from any angle you look at it, these things are a bad idea. If you want an animatronic suit hybrid for your restaurant, don't make a Springlock suit. If you want to pinch your pennies and save a bunch of money, don't make a Springlock suit. If you're a crazy serial killer looking to get away with murder, don't make a Springlock suit. There is no scenario where you should ever attempt to make anything remotely similar to this in real life. But you all kept asking. For those who don't know, I am a mechanical engineer, and it turns out that real engineers have a very thorough process that they follow to make sure they don't accidentally start their own indie horror franchises. If we follow this process to the letter and approach it in a way that a real engineer would, I am positive we'll be able to create a Springlock suit that is 100% safe. In fact, I am so confident in it that by the end of this project, I am gonna put my body on the line and wear the thing myself. This is not a cautionary tale of hubris. This is a lesson in proper due diligence. Richard, hit that intro. So, what is the engineering design process? Well, there are technically a couple different versions, but it's generally broken down into 4 distinct phases: requirements, conceptual design, detailed design, and verification. And each of these phases is capped off with arguably the most important, and sometimes most despised part of the whole process: the design review, where you present your work to a bunch of other engineers to get their feedback and suggestions at various key points. The idea is that if you get a bunch of people with different backgrounds to look at your project, they're more likely to spot potential problems that an individual might have missed, and spot them early enough so that you don't get to the end and realize, oh, you wanted an animatronic? I thought you said Iron Maiden. Oh, shoot. This is my first design review. You are my panel of apathetic coworkers, and together I'm going to take you through an authentic requirements design review. Today, we're gonna nail down the exact problem statement that we're trying to solve, come up with a list of requirements that we can use to judge our final design, and then throw out a couple of very rough design ideas to begin considering. Based on the feedback I get today, the next video will be the conceptual design review, where we go through 3 to 4 design concepts to determine which one we want to pursue going forward. Then comes the detailed design review, where we refine the design we selected into real engineering drawings. And lastly, assuming everything goes well, comes the verification design review, where we build a working prototype of our detailed design and test it against the requirements we define today to see if we did a good job. Now, while I would love to get all the way to part 4 of this project and wind up with at least a piece of a fully functional Springlock suit, building one requires a lot of money that I don't have. But what I do have is a Patreon, linked in the description down below. And look, I'm not making any promises, I'm just saying, if I happen to come into a lot of disposable income by the end of this project, then I might be able to build a really cool suit to teabag on William's grave. Get a lot of other cool stuff too, more information down there. Anyway, let's bust out our stock standard bland PowerPoint and get into the first step of the requirements design review, the problem statement. Because you can't solve a problem if you don't know what problem you're trying to solve. In the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, they needed an animatronic that could also be worn as a mascot costume for their pizza restaurant. However, my problem statement is going to be a little different, because as I pointed out in this video, if you use the engineering process to solve this problem, your end product will probably involve no springs nor locks. Instead, for this project, we're essentially trying to create a replica of the Springlock suits from the games that will look cool and get a lot of dem YouTube clicks. And hopefully not get me killed. According to in-game descriptions, these special suits contain internal endoskeletons that can drive their movements while in animatronic mode. This endoskeleton is attached to an outer frame with spring locks, which, if you didn't know, are actually a real mechanism that do exactly what they say on the tin. They lock a spring in place. If you've got like a fancy deck latch or some sort of clicky pen, you've definitely seen one before. These spring locks can be used to pull the endoskeleton back and hold it in place, making room for a person to hop inside and walk around like a mascot costume. Now, obviously, there are a couple of problems with this design. First, the whole crushing you to death thing. Seems like a pretty big one. Based on this, we can infer that the suits from the games use what are called compression springs, designed to push the endoskeleton back into place. So you pull the endoskeleton back to make room, lock it into place, and cross your fingers that the spring locks don't break while you're still in there. Ouch. But contrary to what the games would have you believe, this is actually a very easy problem to solve. Just swap out those compression springs for tension springs that lock the endoskeleton in animatronic mode, then pulls it away from the center to go to suit mode. That way, your body is never in the path of the springs, and if the locks ever do break, it'll be when it's in animatronic mode. Crazy how this seemingly unsolvable problem is actually very solvable. Unfortunately, there is still the lingering issue that the suits, as described in the game, wouldn't work at all. The problem is, a spring is only capable of moving something in one direction. So if you attached a bunch of spring locks to the top part of the arm, you could pull it back, but the forearm piece would still be in the way. And if you put more spring locks on the forearm, you couldn't pull it down because the top is already attached to its own spring locks. It can't come down without those also coming down. And even if you designed it in such a way that they could come down, well, I mean, first of all, they wouldn't by definition be locked, but also you would then need to pull the shoulder down. And if the shoulder came down, it would push the torso, which would push the legs, which would push the feet, which can't be pushed. They're already on the ground. Alright then, maybe we just need to straighten out the elbow so that all the spring locks move in the same direction. You T-pose the animatronic while you pull everything back, hop inside, and then you can move around like normal. Except, you still couldn't do that because you've now changed the pivot point of the motor relative to the suit. They wouldn't be able to move together, and you'd be stuck walking around like this. Which, I guess is like kind of a vibe. Hey, kids! In order to maintain your full mobility in both suit and animatronic mode, you'd need to design the endoskeleton in such a way that it can come apart. Which, of course, is pretty challenging, considering the whole point of an endoskeleton is to provide a solid frame to drive the animatronic movements. So the real engineering design challenge of this project is finding a way to clear out space within the animatronic while maintaining a full range of motion, a feat that a game-accurate suit simply could not accomplish. I'll talk about some potential ways we could address this problem at the end of the video, but before we can do that, the next step in a requirements design review is to define, well, the requirements. Would have been kind of weird if we didn't talk about it. Think of engineering requirements as measurable goals for the project. They are simultaneously the criteria for measuring success in the final product and the guidelines to decide which design is the best to pursue. As the old engineering adage goes, if you don't know where you're going, how will you know when you get there? Based on the problem statement we laid out and the potential issues we've already identified, our first two requirements are going to be accuracy and mobility. The whole point of this project is to make the animatronics from the games, albeit with some changes to not be stupid. But it wouldn't be all that satisfying if my version of a Springlock suit didn't use any spring locks. Trust me, I've learned that the hard way. Now, 99.9999999999999, probably another 9 in there percent of the time, if you're doing anything other than making a replica of something that you probably shouldn't replicate, this is a very bad requirement. You never want to prescribe a specific solution at the start of the project. The whole point of the engineering process is to remain open and objective and find the best solution to a problem, not the one you think is the coolest. This is sometimes called a golden cow, and it's probably why the suits in the game turned out just so bad. Someone was a little too into springs. The second issue is that accuracy is kind of hard to measure. We need all of our requirements to have some sort of quantitative value attached to them, like cost measured in dollars or weight measured in pounds. Yes, I'm American, deal with it. Accuracy doesn't really have something like this aside from just vibes, so I'd love to hear your suggestions on how to make this more objective in the comments down below. Mobility is a lot easier. We can measure that based on the number of degrees of freedom that the final product has in both animatronic and suit mode. A degree of freedom is basically just a movable joint. So, like the example we looked at before, if the elbow can move in animatronic mode, but not suit mode, that wouldn't count. We need to find a way for it to move in both modes. And hey, I already brought them up, but two more requirements we should include are weight and cost. This suit needs to be worn by a dude who hasn't been to a gym, end of sentence, so we need to try and keep it as light as possible. Unfortunately, I don't have any personal experience designing wearable exoskeletons, so I'm not sure what a good benchmark weight would be, but hey, hopefully there's a lot of you watching right now, and if any of you happen to have any experience with this sort of stuff, I'd love your input. Every engineering project is a collaborative effort after all. As for cost, I know we aren't actually designing this to be used, but I think in the spirit of the project, it should remain at least somewhat practical. The Springlock suits were created so that Fazbear didn't have to pay for a separate animatronic and mascot costume. So we should aim to have it cost less than the combined price of those two, which, by my research, is around $9,000, depending on how fancy you want to get. I'll be honest, I think this one's going to be way harder to hit than people think, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And of course, we need to include safety. This requirement is included in every single engineering project, bar none. In fact, you'll probably be comforted to know that real-life engineers value safety so much, they developed an entirely separate process to quantify it called a failure modes and effects analysis. I'll talk about it in more detail in a future video, but essentially it allows an engineer to identify all the possible ways that a design could fail, and either remove those failure modes or mitigate them enough so that they don't pose a significant risk. So it could help you realize that, oh, I don't know, hypothetically, your Chuck E. Cheese ripoff mixed with a Gundam could wind up smushing you into jam if the parts get a little too rusty. You know, it's just a thought. And on that note, another important requirement is reliability, which is a measure of how long a design will last, how often it needs maintenance, and how easy that maintenance is to perform. Sometimes I'll hear people try and excuse the Springlock suits by saying they only failed because they were old and the parts were worn out. And like, that's correct. Seems like a problem they should have fixed though. Oh, don't worry, the plane only crashed because the wings were only designed for one flight. So why'd you do that though? Make them work though. Oftentimes, engineers will use the total part count to measure reliability. After all, if your design has a lot of moving parts, then it has a lot of things that can break. Most of the time, the best part in a design is the one that doesn't exist. And finally, for a requirement more tied to the Springlock suits specifically, we want the transition time moving from animatronic mode back to suit mode to be as low as possible. The whole point of the suit is that it can perform on stage as an animatronic, and when it's done, someone can quickly hop inside and go interact with the kids. That illusion is kind of broken if it takes 20 minutes to get the thing on. Hey, sorry kids, Freddy's gonna be right back. He just has to go, take a massive dump, but he'll be right back. Don't you get in there. So to recap, we've got 7 main requirements for this project. Mobility, measured in degrees of freedom in both modes. Accuracy, with a measurement to be determined. Cost, measured in dollars. Weight, measured in pounds. Safety, measured with an FMEA. Reliability, measured with a component total. And transition time in minutes. During the next conceptual design review, we're going to use these 7 requirements to objectively judge a few different possible designs to figure out which one is objectively the best. But before we can do that, I need some help from all of you. In the description down below, I've included a Google form. I need all of you to rank each of these requirements from most important to least important, and suggest any other important requirements that you think I missed. Remember, the whole point of a design review is to get outside help. And instead of that outside help coming from a Zoom call of grumpy old white dudes, it's coming from all of you. What do you mean, hey, I'm not trying to make any assumptions. Maybe you're a grumpy old white dude too, I'm just saying. But that nearly brings the requirements design review to a close. Hopefully this has painted a good picture of where this project is going, and maybe taught you a bit about how real-world engineering works too. In part 2, whenever it's ready, we'll hold the official conceptual design review to try and nail down the specific design that we want to pursue moving forward. But before we end, I wanted to float a few very base level ideas for solving that moving joint problem that we talked about in the beginning. Remember, we need a way to move the endoskeleton out of the way without hindering the mobility of the suit or the structural integrity of the animatronic. Obviously, the simplest way to accomplish this would be to ditch the endoskeleton altogether. As I talked about in this video, real-world animatronic suit hybrids actually exist, but they use a motorized exoskeleton. All of the joints and supports are built into the frame, leaving the middle completely open for a person, no moving parts required. This is probably the simplest and safest option to solve this problem in real life. Trouble is, it doesn't use any spring locks. Or springs, for that matter, because you literally don't need them. So, it wouldn't pass our accuracy requirement, and I think a lot of you would get real mad at me. Other possible options, we could design the joints to come apart when switching modes, using something like a dog clutch or a similar mechanism. This would solve the mobility problem because it would allow the bones to simply detach, and the wearer wouldn't have to fight against engaged motors to move the suit around. However, if the joints can come apart, it adds a potential failure mode of the motors decoupling at an inopportune time or not properly fitting back together, potentially compromising the safety and reliability of the suit. The other idea that I had was to make the bones of the endoskeleton telescoping so that they can change their size when in suit mode. This would solve the mounting problem. You don't need to pull the upper arm bone down, you can just make it longer. But again, it does come with its own risks, since, again, the whole point of an endoskeleton is to support the animatronic. And that might be hard if the bones can all slide around. None of these are perfect, but hey, that's what the design review process is for. So if you have any ideas to improve these or a completely new idea altogether, please feel free to leave it in the comments down below or hit up my email in the description down below. I'd love to hear what you all have to say. And now that we're done, there is one more crucial part of any design review that you must know. It is absolutely impossible to end them in a satisfying way. So if any of you have any other questions, please feel free to let me know. And of course, in real life, this is always being held at 4:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, and everyone has either talked your ear off about their questions already, or they turned off their camera and have been playing Marvel Snap for the past 20 minutes and have no idea what you're talking about. So I'll just sit here awkwardly for a few seconds. And then I'll sign off and sprint to the bathroom because these things are way too long and I had a buffalo chicken sandwich for lunch that is not sitting well with me right now. That's not a metaphor, by the way. That is some real hidden engineering knowledge that I'm sharing with all of you. That's how every single design review ends. If you're not taking a massive dump exactly 2 minutes after getting off the call, you're doing it wrong. All right, Freddy, out of the way! And of course, a massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, including Alex, Alakazam, Big Dog Ty for the win, Captain Kirby, Sidian, Sherian Mark, Stylish, The Boss Killer 94, Ty Studio, and Moki Ubu.